This is the Reason interview with Nick Gillespie. My guest today is Alton Brown, who for years hosted Good Eats on the Food Network and married his interest in science to the making of dinner. He's currently touring the country, and he's also just published Food for Thought, a fantastic collection of essays about food, culture, and his life on and off the screen. I talk with him about how food transcends politics, why fusion cooking isn't cultural appropriation, and why there's always room for Jello salad on his menu. Here is the Reason interview with Alton Brown. Alton Brown, thanks for talking to Reason.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So you are on a farewell tour, and you also have a new book out. I want to ask, based on some research I did, is this a real farewell tour, or is this like the Ramones and the Who, at various stages?
No, I'm gonna stick the landing on this one. No,
Okay.
this will be my last national tour for sure. But this whole thing about living on a bus for 13 weeks, it's not nearly as glamorous as you might think.
I think it would be, but I guess it gets a
No,
little bit cramped.
no, it actually really isn't.
If you could,
Hardly.
if you could take a train like your own coach, like
Like
what
in the
was it,
Wild Wild
President?
West.
Yeah, I was going to
The
say
original
President
Wild Wild West.
Garfield
Yeah,
in Wild
yeah,
Wild West or something, right?
yeah. That would be a different matter entirely.
Yeah,
I
but then
think that
you
sounds
wouldn't get
glamorous.
anywhere, right? You would be
Well,
stopping in the middle of nowhere half the time.
I kind of like the idea of that though. If you had a train with a couple of extra cars that you could just open up,
Yeah.
and you would just do your show out in the middle of a field on a siding someplace, and then close it up and go do it
That
again.
would be,
That's
that might heal the country
oh,
as well. So your book, Food for Thought. I want to start. You open it. You were born in 1962, so you're towards the end of the baby boom, and you open talking about watching TV and eating Captain Crunch. I have two sons. I was born in 1963, so I'm right there with you. I reading that, it was like reading Proust talking about a Madeline. I started having internal bleeding on my mouth. What is it about Captain Crunch, particularly watching, in front of TV on Saturday mornings? Why is that so important?
well. I think that no kid today, no child today can understand the magic of Saturdays. It was literally a magical day. And if you were good, at least in my household, you got
Yeah.
complete control of one of the TVs for several hours. And so, number one, it was your first real exposure to choice.
Right.
It was also first exposure to a form of media that was completely out of control as far as trying to manipulate your young mind,
Yeah.
which it did. And Captain Crunch was just the flavor. And as you pointed out a moment ago when you mentioned internal bleeding, the the sense memory of these hard little pillows shredding the roof of your mouth, which I enjoyed. I think I've
Yeah.
always liked a little pain with my pleasure, and
Mhm.
and so I think that's what makes that memory so potent. That and the folding tray table. Whereas in the particular story that I
Yeah.
tell, it's also another shocking element. But
Yeah, talk about I think you said that it had flowers on it and things like that. Explain what a folding tray table was, and in your household, was it considered a break with decorum to eat somewhere other than the kitchen or dining room
yes,
table?
yes. It was a break with decorum. It was special. It was something that had to be you had to apply for it in advance, like a
Mhm.
passport. And the only time that it was unilaterally allowed in my house was when either the Saturday morning or if a Jacques Cousteau special was on TV in the evenings. In which case it was also allowed.
Yeah, it did seem like you were kind of giving up as a family in the late '60s, early '70s if your parents were like, "Fuck it, we're eating in front of the TV."
No, we had a little kitchenette, a
Yeah,
little dinette area in our
right.
kitchen that was really, that is where most meals were taken,
You
and we didn't break from that.
describe a little bit, you talk about the powerful, sensation of the way the milk, and at one point you use buttermilk, in your
No, that the
cereal.
whole story is about the accidental grabbing of buttermilk. That's
Yeah,
the story. That's the entire story is
yeah.
that I accidentally one morning, when trying to empower myself to make my own cereal, reached for the little cage the
Mhm.
milkman had left,
Mhm.
because we had a milkman back then. And one bottle had a blue label and one bottle had a green label. And I thought the green was prettier. I didn't for a moment at my age
Right.
consider that there would be a differentiation of the product, which of course
Yeah.
there would be. And so, I poured on my cereal and I sit down, innocently shove it in my gob, and it was buttermilk. And the shock to the system
Yeah.
of that flavor. I didn't know there was such a thing
Right.
as buttermilk. I mean, why would there be? How could that exist? Why would
What
it
was
exist?
buttermilk used for other I mean, I guess you make biscuits with it, and I
Well,
know it was floating around my household, but
my mother drank it. My
yeah.
mother was raised on this stuff,
Mhm.
in the South, and enjoyed just consuming it. It was a
Yeah.
very different product back then.
Yeah.
Today's buttermilk is far more like pourable yogurt than it is
Mhm.
actually buttermilk. But back then, it was quite sour.
Mhm.
Quite, it wasn't viscous enough to where I recognized it as a different product. But the memory is like the first time that I was surprised by anything in a negative way in life, in such a powerful way. And I think the telling part of the story is that, revolting as it was, as shockingly revolting as it was, after a few minutes, I did go back and taste it again. And I think that that's what kind of sets the pattern for my own culinary life, is
Yeah.
that I I will I will go back after the strange flavor. And that was certainly typical of my childhood.
Is that temperamental, or is that something that can be taught? Because you put I mean, throughout your entire body of work, you put a lot of emphasis on things like curiosity and trying things, or
Yes.
seeking things out.
I think that I do talk a lot about curiosity,
Mhm.
which I think is the most powerful and most kind of positive human um, emotion, so to speak. I don't think that one needs to delve into strange things for the sake of strange things, but there is a real value in the brain being out of its comfort zone, your senses being out of their comfort zone, your body being out of its comfort zone, in a thoughtful, exploratory manner. I'm not suggesting that we eat really strange foods for shock factor, but I think that, especially as you grow older and you get used to so many things, and you know 99% of what we put in our mouths as adults, we know what it's going to taste like when it gets to us. I mean, we just do from experience.
Yeah.
I think that stepping outside of that in a thoughtful manner, really thinking about what's going on, the input that we're getting, is something I certainly want to miss. I'm not going to say that it's like critical to being a
Yeah.
good person or anything, but I do think that it makes life a hell of a lot more interesting.
How you had mentioned before that, in the 60s, and this was partly actually in response to very early in the 60s, when the then head of the FCC declared that television was a vast wasteland. We started getting more kind of educational television, although it was not educating us in the way that maybe the government wanted us to. But you talked about how we were being sold a ton of stuff, a ton of products. There were tie-ins between the cartoons and the products that were being sold.
Oh yeah.
How much of the Captain Crunch experience, and I don't think that 25-year-old me would ever have imagined that, 61-year-old me would be asking a question like this to somebody like you. How much of the Captain Crunch experience was the packaging and the commercials and him swashbuckling? Like,
It
how does that
it's not,
factor
well,
into that?
first off, let's step back from the
Yeah.
captain,
Okay.
and look at the world of cereals, of sugary cereals in the 60s. What's significant, and I don't know if anybody's ever written a study on this, hell, I might, is that this was really the first time that children were being directly marketed to
Mhm.
by very smart people, right? Who were
Yeah.
designing products and designing advertising specifically to pump us full of, look, it doesn't matter that it was crap,
Right.
which it was and still is. What matters is that kids, all of a sudden, we've felt seen by a bigger world.
Yeah.
And there was something, I remember sending in box tops
Mhm.
for whatever
Oh,
the
yeah.
prize was promised. And but I'll
Yeah,
tell you something that was really worthwhile is like you would save up like 3 Cheerios. It wasn't usually Cheerios, but
yeah.
some other popular.
Cheerios were kind of a punishment, right?
Well,
You
Cheerios,
know?
yeah, it was like time out. Right? Like you're getting
Or
nothing but Cheerios
Life
and
magazine, like you're
and
really in trouble, but
and grape nuts.
yeah.
It was the other one. Although I really love grape. I'm a texture guy. So, but the anticipation of like
Yeah,
of going through all this cereal, getting the box tops,
yeah,
sending the box tops in
right.
by mail, and then waiting for the
Yeah,
thing to come, which was
yeah,
usually weeks,
yeah,
right? And so the anticipation. I mean, it was very. I'm not going to say empowering, but powerful
yeah,
in a way. That
and
whole experience
and
was really, really
instructive,
powerful.
right?
I think so. It
Yeah.
certainly taught you how to be a consumer,
Mhm.
and and that's a valuable lesson in and of itself. But I
Yeah,
don't think that people that didn't live during that time
right.
do not know what this feels like. And I will say that like I was the last year of the baby boomers. So I'm practically Gen X, but I
Mhm.
think that once Gen X is over, no one knows what that feels like anymore. And I think it informed us in more ways than a lot of people think.
Yeah, and it can be seen as being cynical, but it's also being realistic and just being, kind of out there in the world. Because as that same, we were being marketed to, there was also things like wacky packages and,
Sure.
critiques that were being mass marketed to us, but that were critiques of mass marketing.
Well,
So,
and we can be critical about that
yeah.
because a lot of companies were selling kids really crap nutrition. But let me tell you something: the world has not changed one iota. In
Hmm.
fact, it's just taken that model and perfected it,
Yeah.
and more and more and more and more as we break into micro tribes. It's the
Hmm.
same thing, only really now the product is us.
Yeah. I want to, the Captain Crunch Madeline moment is one of in the book, it's one of the meals that you say that made you.
Yeah.
Another one is a pizza that you had in Tuscany.
Yes.
Describe that. And I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in New Jersey. I
Oh,
am a
pizza.
pizza, but I also what it reminded me of is when I went to college, 25 miles from my hometown, and I had a white pizza for the first time, and I was like, I have never experienced something so sophisticated, so delicious. My taste buds are exploding just thinking about it. The way you describe this pizza is, it's one of the best pieces of writing I've read in forever.
Oh,
What
thank you.
was going on with that pizza that it blew your mind?
Well, I first off, I'm not from New York or New Jersey, so
Yeah.
I had not ever this happened in college, so I had never been exposed to what I would call great or even authentic pizza. Pizza for me was Pizza Hut pizza. Well, that's not entirely true
Yeah.
because I actually worked in a pizzeria during college that made better than average pizza, but still, it was deck pizza. At best, it was New York slice style pizza.
Mhm.
And like most of it's funny, all three of the stories in the book that are meals that made me, I realize in retrospect, having written about them, is that they one of the greatest elements is surprise,
Hmm.
not knowing that this is coming. I was lucky enough to spend a semester of college in a small town in Tuscany, in Italy, doing theater there with the University of Georgia, and I literally. As the story unfolded, it was an accident. I just got invited by this old man and his couple of kids, his grandchildren, to go up in the hills. I would never be able to find it again in 100 years. I don't even know if it exists. To
Hmm.
this shack, literally a Pizza Hut
Yeah.
that this guy, was making pizza, and the pizza was utterly alien when delivered to me. It was like an amoeba of flat, crackery, burnt on the bottom dough with a little oil, a little cheese, and shaved artichokes, which I'd never had before, shaved baby
Yeah.
artichokes, and some peppers, like all that was on it. And yet when I ate it, and look, I'm not saying it's the best pizza I ever had. I'm
Right.
not by no means was it the best pizza I ever had, but it it summed up a lot of things that I had never had before in that kind of way that is the gestalt of the whole thing being very, very powerful. And I've never been able to completely get my head around why that was so important. But I will also say that the place itself was very
Mhm.
important. This strange kind of mysterious place that I went, it was almost like something out of the Odyssey. And to be honest, which of course I never went back to again.
Yeah.
And so it's become now in my mind over decades
Yeah.
epic. At the time, I probably thought, oh, this is really great. But it wasn't revelatory then. It was only
Right.
revelatory as the years went by that that
Mhm.
moment, that one pizza stood out as such an important thing. And hearing that old man say to me in Italian, "You remember this," which,
Mhm.
yeah, darn right, Mister.
Oh,
Have
that is like the Odyssey or something,
well,
yeah, like
in my mythology, and let's face it, when you get into your 60s, if you're not building a mythology out of your past, you're really missing out because
yeah.
it's one of the great pleasures of longevity is being able to create something a little more epic of your history than perhaps the events that actually took place. You know, as I say in the author's statement on the book,
Mm,
you know, most of this happened, and if it didn't, it should have.
right.
Because I'm not about to pretend for a moment that my memory is a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
Yes, everything in that book happened in my if it didn't, I remember it that way. But who's to say? You know, who's to say how good memories? But that pizza, yes, it was a terrific pizza. Was the best pizza in the world? Absolutely not. Life changing for me, totally.
The, 3rd meal is at a roadside restaurant, that served Indian food
Motel.
or
No, it was a motel.
a motel,
It
excuse me.
was a
Yeah, thank you.
motel in South Carolina being managed by an Indian family who were
Right.
living on the premises, and it was them sharing part of their dinner
And
with
there's,
the
by the way, just to be clear, it's South Asian Indians,
yes.
and you were, told that there was gonna be curry.
Yeah.
Explain what happened there and why this has stayed with you.
Well, it turned out to be kadhi, which is a different thing altogether, but I didn't know
Right.
that. It you know, it's basically a relatively simple yogurt-based soup that is heavily spiced. And I had never had it. And watched it being made, helped a little bit, could not have been more humble.
Yeah.
And yet it conveyed an entire continent of flavors. But then also, I can't remove the incredibly generous hospitality and openness with which it was given to us. These were really humble people living in a very humble little apartment in the back of a motel, and they opened that home up to us without reserve. And I think that flavors the meal in a very powerful way. Yes, the soup was amazing. It was redolent of all these spices. It was literally like somebody had put southern India into a juicer and squeezed it, extracted out everything of it, and then put it in this little cup and given it to me. Um, so that was a powerful sense memory kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also, I don't think that I had ever experienced that level of open hospitality of just the simple act of people giving me strangers feeding
Yeah.
me, which I
And
think about.
you still, you try to recreate, or you've tried to recreate that meal, and
Anytime.
you get close, but not quite there. So you're like
I love it.
chasing the
You know why? It's
dragon,
not in my
right?
bones. It's not in my
Yeah,
bones.
yeah,
I can scratch the itch, but the itch never goes away, and it won't ever. Probably because, you know, that woman learned that recipe from her
mhm,
mother-in-law, time after time of making it in India. I don't have that in my bones. I'm not gonna be able to replicate that. I can get close enough to just miss it worse.
yeah. You, in the book and throughout your career, you've talked a lot about, questions about cultural appropriation, and the use of things. And can you talk a little bit about this? Because one of the things that is fascinating about food in an era where you said, we're breaking down into micro tribes and things like that, and that is kind of true. And there's good parts to that and bad parts to it. But one of the things that has flourished, certainly over our lifetimes, is this profusion. I don't want to say world cuisine, but people growing up in a small town in Georgia or in a cosmopolitan, in Atlanta or New York or
Mhm.
Bombay or whatever, or Mumbai. Um, Everybody is mixing. what's the positive case for cultural appropriation in an era where oftentimes people are like, hey, you know what, you shouldn't be making that food. Maybe you shouldn't even be eating it.
I do have an essay in the book about this because it's something I think about a lot. And I, this the American ideal, so many
Mm,
foods are not actually where you think they're from.
right.
I talk about the fact that, fish and chips in England,
Mhm.
that's a Jewish diaspora dish that was
Right.
created by Jews after Cromwell his time,
Right,
or
and if I may, because I found that interesting, it was actually Jews from Portugal, right, who
yes,
eventually got
yes,
kicked out and end
yes,
up
you
back
got
in England, where the
yes,
Jews had been kicked out by Edward the First in the 1300s. So it's like
right.
we're already in a real whirly bird of, of
Of a lot of national dishes are
yeah,
that way. Shakshuka in Israel. It's
mhm,
North African. Nothing is. Everything's fluid, right? As
right,
people move around the planet, and I think that the appropriation part becomes an issue, or what we call appropriation. I call it plagiarism. Is when
mm,
you claim something without appreciating and kind of clearly stating where it's from and what it is.
yeah,
If you are, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. It's like I talk in the book about, if a Greek family starts a pizzeria, if a
mhm,
Chinese family straight from Beijing opens a
oh,
hot
yeah,
dog shop, are they appropriating? Or are they just smart? If I
right,
put sriracha, on my scrambled eggs, am I appropriating, or is that just
yeah,
good culinary sense?
yeah,
I think it's all a matter of how you do it. My
mhm,
thing has always been, hey, this is America. You buy the groceries, the food yours.
right,
And I think that there's something about that. But in this day and age, we can learn where things are from. We
right,
can, if we put in the mental rigor, the
mhm,
intellectual rigor, learn where things are from and something of their history. I think that makes food taste better.
yeah,
I do that not because I feel beholden to give credit to someone like, oh, the people of Oaxaca make this.
mm,
They're the ones,
right,
and point to them. Is that should be part of the rigor of simply figuring out where your food's from,
right,
right? So, um, what we don't get to do is we don't get to just pick up things along the way and then kind of claim them, and start businesses about them and blogs about them. Um, but if you really love something and you spend
yeah,
time learning about it, appreciating it, and give credit where credit is due, I don't think it's appropriation. I don't.
yeah. Would you
Not
say it's celebration or,
I think if it's done right, it is.
yeah,
If it's done right, it's celebration, absolutely. And if
yeah,
I take, something from the Hmong culture and work it into my food, as long as I talk about it, and I'm aware of it, then I don't personally think there's anything wrong with it. This whole thing of you shouldn't even be eating it. What? I'll eat whatever I freaking want. If I can afford it and it's for sale, I'm gonna eat
yeah,
it. Nobody's gonna tell me not to eat it.
yeah,
Do I have the right to then start a blog about it? Depends.
right.
That's simply a matter of respect, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm still. I always go back to I'm not sure exactly, who what army General Zoe belonged to, but it's an interesting circuit, right? Like, and he may have been in the same military that Captain Crunch was,
It might have
such a
been,
big
but,
wheel in.
it's
Yeah,
kind of like, a chicken cacciatore is not Italian, it's American.
right.
There's so many dishes from
Yeah,
so many places that originated in America that happened because of the melting pot,
yeah,
which we're very fortunate to have, and very
yeah.
fortunate to be part of.
So talk, yeah, I mean, you would agree, right? I mean, it seems inarguable that food cuisine, or I guess there is only food cuisine, but cuisine in America has just gotten, astronomically better and more interesting, or at least more varied over the past 60 years. Why did that happen? And is it a good thing, or what are the limits to that kind of explosion?
Well, it happened because of food media,
Mhm.
above all, because if a Laotian family opens a small restaurant in Buffalo, New York, and no one but Laotians go to it, then it doesn't blow up.
Right.
Instagram and the internet in general changed that exposure level, which is good because then more people learn about it. The world becomes more intimate, in its way,
Mhm.
and there's a great amount of appreciation. I think the flip side is, unfortunately, I think that America's cooking skills at home are decaying.
Mhm.
I do not think, and I think that part of that is because now so many young people consume so much culinary content in places like TikTok, where
Mhm.
food videos are more freak shows than they are representation of food that you would want to make and eat, and are there
Mhm.
to kind of thrill the eyes and be sometimes just disgusting, or sometimes look
Yeah.
amazing, but that's not how you make
So
that.
this is like the, where you're eating hot wings that you need to wear a gas mask in order to, consume
There,
them
I
and
mean, there
things
is
like
that.
that?
There's
Yeah.
always been that level of extremism in food ever since we started having eating contests, which is
Right.
taking food out of context of what it actually is and turning it into something else.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that one of the reasons food remains such a hot subject is that we still haven't figured out how to convey taste and smell through technology. Uh,
Mhm.
and hopefully we won't ever figure out how to do
Right.
that. I would
Because
prefer.
then we have to do it in real life, right?
Well, once AIs figure out taste and flavor, we will. I think that that'll be the last stroke of humanity. We are distinctly human because things we smell and things we eat form memories via our limbic system. That makes us really special.
Mhm.
In the animal world, in general, certainly primates all do that. Dogs do that. But I think that it keeps us still special from the
Mhm.
AI.
Do you, when you say that kind of culinary skills are declining or degrading in America,
Yeah.
is that something? You talk about your mother as well as especially your grandmother in the book. Did you learn directly from them, or was it something where, in the same way, I was just talking about this with somebody the other day? Up through probably about 1970, it was common that most women knew how to sew using a sewing machine, and they would,
Yes.
be able to churn out Halloween costumes and at least simple clothing. They also knew how to cook. My mother was not a
Mhm.
particularly good cook, but she was in the kitchen every day. I mean, has that, has is the transmission of culinary skills gone down because we don't do that anymore? Or is it that we're chasing a very high cuisine rather than a kind of basic
Well, I'm not going to
family
say that we're
cuisine?
we're we're chasing a high cuisine,
Mhm,
but I do think that we're chasing an Instagram derived cuisine,
mhm.
and we can't look to our mothers to say, can you make me pad Thai tonight?
Yeah,
Unless your mother happens to be Thai, um, so that what I would call the base cuisine of what a family used to eat. And by the
mhm.
way, when I was a kid, it was not at all uncommon for like Monday night is this night, Tuesday
Yeah,
night is this night,
right.
Thursday night is that night, Friday night is fish sticks.
Yep.
Because you're either Catholic or you got Catholic friends. So a mother, and I'm going to use that a whichever adult supported
Right,
this, whether it was a male or female, could get by on 20 dishes
right.
and maybe a couple of special holiday meals and a couple of
Mhm.
desserts. So the recipe box was not deep nor wide, nor did
Yeah,
it have to be. And the great benefit of that is that if you paid any attention at all, after a few years of Mondays, you'd have that pot roast down, or pot roast, which is
right.
usually on Sundays. You would learn those dishes as a foundation, and we don't have that anymore. We
Yeah.
don't. Now, for one thing, during our childhood, mothers started working, and then it
Mhm.
became more the rule than the exception. And then we had kind of I look at the 80s and 90s as kind of just a wasteland, a culinary
Mm.
wasteland, in a lot of ways because people weren't learning how to cook from families. They were learning to cook from cookbooks
Right.
and magazines. That was the great area of like Gourmet Magazine, the Time Life series,
Yeah.
Julia Child books. books. Then in the late 90s, it all changed and became television. And for a decade, almost 2 decades, I think
Mhm.
people learned primarily from food shows. And Food Network certainly was there until cooking shows just turned into competition shows. And now I think
Right.
we're back adrift again.
Yeah, and you're down on the competition shows at this point, right?
I am not. I don't want to do any more of them.
Yeah,
I did my share.
yeah,
Hopefully there were some good ones. I did them because I had a contract and I had to do the work.
right.
I am. I think they have a place, but
Mhm.
that's all there is anymore. And so I think that young people now see food as simply something you use to beat somebody else for something. I
Right.
think that it is other than Martha Stewart's whole perfection thing, which I despise almost beyond my words of description.
Why do
Um,
you, why does that rankle you
well,
so much?
I have a whole essay about the
Yep.
whole perfection thing. I know a lot more people that stopped entertaining after the rise of Martha Stewart than those that started entertaining because they suddenly became self-aware of their own lack of perfection. And I
Yeah.
know a lot of people that I used to have really good times at their houses eating a bowl of chili or whatever simply stopped because they became so aware of the fact that they didn't have the right pots and pans and they
Mhm.
didn't have the tablecloths and they didn't have this. So I hate that. I absolutely
Yeah.
hate that. I think that that whole perfection thing drug us into dark ages of home
Mhm.
entertainment, where no one really cooked for friends and family anymore because we're all too
Mhm.
scared to. And if we did do it, it was because we were competing. And now with culinary shows,
Yeah.
all we do is compete. And
It
so
is
we're in dark days.
frustrating, yeah, when you go to, when you reach a certain level, I guess, in your life and possibly career and whatnot, where you're going to friends' houses for dinners and everybody is outdoing themselves, and whether the food is good or not, you kind of feel compelled to be like, "This is truly delicious. This is
I'd rather somebody
edible
just make a
quality food."
you know what? Make a big pot of soup and invite a bunch of people over and have
Yeah,
a good time.
yeah,
That used to be what hospitality was about. It wasn't
right,
about impressing. It was about sharing.
yeah.
And I think we had a lot more fun then.
Your inspirations, as you list in the book, include Julia Child, Mr. Wizard, and Monty Python.
Those were the
You know,
inspirations for the show Good Eats. Yeah,
yeah, and
those were
that's,
great
they
books.
obviously, I think everybody would agree with that. But focus a little bit on Julia Child. I mean, she is a fascinating change agent in American society and certainly in post-war culture. What grabbed you and stays with you about Julia Child?
Multiple things. And multiple things that I don't think have ever been replicated
Mm,
in another food personality. One, sheer unmitigated joy.
mm,
She loved what she was talking about. She loved what she was cooking. And her openness to share that joy, whether things were going right or not going right, which she didn't mind showing. She's kind of the anti Martha Stewart. The
right.
turkey falls on the floor, pick up the turkey, laugh about it. Um, and that wonderful sharing of joy made you want to be in there in that kitchen
Yeah.
with her. Number two, she wasn't an expert.
Mhm.
She became one, but she really wasn't. She was constantly in the process of
Mm,
discovery herself. I mean, when you look at her history, she had experience. She wasn't that much of an expert. I mean, she went to Cordon Bleu.
yeah.
Okay, great. But what I think that really there's a class of teacher that is great while they are in the process of discovery themselves. Great teachers are always constantly learning. They may not be constantly learning
Mhm,
the thing they're teaching you, but they are constantly learning, and that keeps
mhm,
a spark going. That I would like to think that if I followed her down any path, at least with the show Good Eats, is that Good Eats was always fun because I was constantly in the state of
yeah.
discovery. And when you're discovering things, you want to share things in a natural way that is very um, catching. And I think that the other thing about Julia was just her humanity, um, her absolute humanity
Mm,
that I think carried across through everything that she did. And I think it's so interesting when people do talk about cultural appropriation. Well, what the hell do you think she was doing? I
right.
mean,
Yeah,
it just
yeah.
she was the problem is she was of course appropriating other white people, being the
Right.
French. Um, but deciphering, and then the last thing is her ability to decipher and demystify. You take a
Mhm,
cuisine like French, which is highly organized and very rigorous, which I'm actually glad of because it gives us form and function for that whole cuisine. Is that she was able to demystify that and make
mhm,
it not as scary for people, which allowed a lot of home cooks in America during her reign to feel that they weren't just low class Americans anymore. We can make French
mhm,
food now, which at the time
yeah.
was considered the world standard.
Right. Mr. Wizard might be unfamiliar to people,
The
maybe
proto
born
Bill
after
Nye, the
1970.
the
Yeah,
the, the proto Bill Nye. Mr. Wizard had there were a lot of shows. He was really the first to try to demystify
yeah.
fully, or make science, higher ideas of science, understandable
Mhm,
through kind of models and storytelling.
mhm.
Bill Nye certainly would be the
Right.
equivalent today. I would say, um, and for me, the science part of cooking has always been critical because I can't cook well just walking in the kitchen and doing it. I
Mhm,
really do need to understand
yeah.
what's going on in order to be a better cook. And that understanding, for me at least, almost always comes out of science. It either comes out of historical understanding of why and how an ingredient or a foodway got someplace,
Yeah.
or the science of what the food actually is doing and needing.
How did you come up with, in Good Eats? I mean, you were constantly coming up with new ways to illustrate the science of gluten or, how different molecules mix.
Yeah.
Was that all just kind of, trial and experimentation to figure out what would represent something?
I'm going to say that probably 50% of the time that I spent
Mhm,
researching and writing that show was about coming up with workable, visual, entertaining, and yet accurate models.
mhm.
What I did not let myself get caught up in was a level of exactitude that would have resulted in no one understanding any of it at all. This
Right.
is a complaint that scientists had about the show, especially in the early days, when they would say, "Well, that's not really how gluten works." And I'm like, "Well, look,
Yeah.
if there's a scale of understanding about gluten from, I don't know which side of the screen you're looking at, from
Yeah.
0 to 100, if I can get them to 70 with this model, I'm going to do that
Right.
because the rest of it I don't care about. I just don't care. And I would rather have 70 than nothing. And I think that a
Mm.
lot of teaching that's done by scientists in both high school and college level ends up not working because they go for 100% or nothing. They go for broke.
Yeah.
If you don't get it 100% right, then you end up not getting any of it. And I'd rather have people get 70%. Um, and doing that in a way that's entertaining, which is absolutely critical. If you aren't entertaining people, they are not paying attention. So you gotta come up with models, whether it's like a skit or it's a whatever it
Right.
is, or puppets, which we used a
Mhm.
lot, and out puppets, because people will watch them and people will be entertained. And it may be days before they realize they learned something. Hell, they may
And
never realize that they learned something, but they did.
but they did. And then how did Monty Python round out this? I mean, it's an influence and it's apparent through what you're doing, but what was the essence of Monty Python that you really loved?
You know, we lost David Lynch recently,
Mhm,
one of my favorite filmmakers and artists, who staunchly believed that art didn't you don't need to explain it. You don't need to explain a lot of things.
mhm,
And I think that is what makes Monty Python humor very often, still to this day, so wickedly on point, is that
mhm,
it doesn't very often explain itself at all, which opens us up to understanding that things that human beings think are funny are not always explicable.
mhm,
Unlike something like Saturday Night Live, which I also riffed on from time to time.
mhm.
Nothing is cringeworthy about Monty Python humor now. There's actually there's nothing politically incorrect. There's nothing
Mhm.
sexist. There's no it simply still works. The absurdism of having the Spanish Inquisition bust into the room.
Right.
Why is that funny? I don't know. I don't know why it's funny. There's certainly nothing funny about the Spanish Inquisition, and
Right.
yet there it is, and we used it. I stole it because I
Mhm.
could, and used it very often
Yeah.
in Good Eats as a celebration of of that. But I do believe that laughing brains are more absorbent.
Mhm.
And I still look to Python as the absolute model of what skit humor can do without explaining itself.
Yeah. It seems like you respond to and are mirroring, I think, a larger trend in American cultures in the post-war era where it became more participatory. Or rather, I mean, people like Julia Child and Mr. Wizard certainly
Yes.
demystified things and then said, like, and maybe you can do this too. Um,
Yes.
is that a big I mean, obviously, the Good Eats is part of that. The cooking shows and they have their excesses. They, suddenly you're like, "Oh, you know what? I'm gonna try something different."
Certainly with Good Eats,
Mhm.
we saw a whole not generation, but a whole person type get off
Mhm.
the sofa for the first time. And that was the engineer-minded American male,
Mhm.
who was a lot of them were motivated by either the devices that we kind of hacked on Good Eats, like smoking a
Right.
fish in a cardboard box,
Mhm.
or the sudden understanding how something worked got a
Yeah.
lot of people, the mechanics of that, the mechanic mindedness of that, got a lot of people into the kitchen who had not been in the kitchen before. So I can only speak to that population
Yeah.
because they were the population that talks to me the most,
Right.
and has voiced their appreciation for that
Mhm.
approach.
You have a great essay titled "Howl of the Husky." For younger, I think people, certainly people born after the baby boom or Gen X, might not realize that husky was a category of youth clothing, or at
Yes,
least for boys. I don't know if there were husky girls as well.
I
What
don't
was
think there were.
husky? Yeah. What?
So husky was you can't fit in the regular clothes. And it was a sub, it was a, it said over the aisle,
Yeah.
husky. And if you
Yeah.
entered that aisle, wherever it was you were buying clothes,
Yeah.
you now have a label. You're husky.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like we're not saying you're fat,
Right.
you're husky. And
Right.
I wonder, I've never been able to find out who decided that was the word husky.
Yeah.
Where, what, why that? Why not slightly balloon like? One of these days I'll figure out the marketing
Yeah.
person that came up with that. But yes, we were
Yeah.
American boys were absolutely labeled once you became a little thick,
You're
which
like
I still
plus
remember.
size, kind of, but not
Yes, but
obese,
I,
but
I, I would dare you to walk into a women's wear store and look for an aisle that says plus size.
yeah.
It might be the whole store is kind of gauged in that
Yeah.
direction. But no, husky, and it's gone now. I don't think we see
Yeah,
husky.
and you became husky because you were eating too much, right? After,
Yes,
the loss of your father and
yes.
yeah,
It
as a
wasn't
kid.
just it wasn't just eating too much. It was what I was eating, which was
Mhm.
massive amounts of crap,
Yeah.
um, a lot of crap. Yeah.
Can you talk about what snapped you out of that? Because you also have a, it's a fascinating, if more complex, sophisticated, wider ranging food as part of the post-war experience, so is dieting, and both getting fat and skinny. And you talk about how
I've
you
done both.
decided, yeah, you were not going to be husky. You were husky no more. Talk about your dieting issues and what that
I didn't.
speaks to in food consumption.
I think that through most of college, I was relatively fit because I delivered pizzas for a living. So it was a
Mhm.
huge amount of running up and down stairs. So I didn't try to not be husky. It was just part of life.
Yeah,
My life is that my body didn't do that. But then I got husky again later. Certainly after the birth of my child, after the birth of my
yeah.
daughter, I did. I went total dad bod plus. Although I don't really appreciate that term. But when I did finally realize that something had to change, when I did finally realize that something had to change, I decided to create a diet that was based on what I had to have, not what I couldn't have. The couldn't list was relatively small. And some things were only allowed once a week, but mostly I had to focus on what I needed from a good nutrition level. And that allowed me to lose a great deal of weight. The problem was that I had not set a goal and kind of lost my mind after I lost
Mhm.
about 50 pounds, because after I lost about 50 pounds, I kind of became another person.
Mhm.
I looked like another person. I didn't recognize myself anymore. And I ended up going through a really traumatic psychological period
Mhm.
after I'd lost the weight, not
Right.
before. I wasn't, and
So
nobody ever.
you could be too thin, right?
Well, look, everybody will tell you that you can be too thin.
Mhm.
It's why
Yeah.
we have anorexia problems. It for me, it was simply a matter of personal identity. Who
Mhm.
are you? Who is this person looking back at me in the mirror? And by the way, I never saw a thin person. Even when I was down to 165 pounds, I didn't see thin.
Right.
I just saw someone else that
Mhm.
wasn't me. When you lose your visual identity with yourself, you can go a little crazy. That's what
Mhm.
the invisible man is about. Once you can't really be seen,
Yeah.
what are you? And I think that more people should probably talk about that. So I'm back to husky. I am. I'm
Yeah.
husky.
All
And
right.
that's who I am. I'm husky.
Is
I try to stay fit. I try to eat well, but I'm husky. And I'm mostly husky because I like alcohol.
yeah.
And I'm not willing to give up alcohol to not be husky. So,
Is, you invoked, the concept of dad bod. Is
which I hate. I
is
hate
it
that expression very much, but it is a
well,
thing.
yeah, and I mean, is it good now? We seem to have a wider range of, kind of, positive body types, and, you can be gigantically fat and obese where you need, a motor scooter and things like that. I think most people would agree that's bad, but are we more forgiving of body types now than, we used to be? And if so, is that a good thing?
I think we say that we are.
Mhm.
I think we say that we are. I don't think we actually are.
Yeah.
We're animals.
Yeah.
We're still animals, and we say that we are. We
Yeah.
pretend to be. And I think that the important part of that is that media is what got us into a lot of trouble.
Mhm.
The media around fashion certainly has. It has become more accepting. I think it's interesting that more body types are considered acceptable and beautiful, and
Mhm.
in when it's women than men.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that dad bod is almost universally looked down on as
Mhm.
weak, as no, so I think there's a bit of a contradiction going on there that I
Mhm.
hope work out. But I think that what we need to focus on, by and large, is simply being healthy, and to
Yeah.
understand you can be healthy and have different sizes and shapes. That's called genetic.
Right. Yeah.
That's genetics. My genetics want me almost universally to stay at exactly the same weight. My weight
Mhm.
has not changed a pound in the last 3 years. It's a husky, but I've never had a cavity.
Mhm.
Genetics.
Wow.
Now, can I go out every morning and run 5 miles and work out and blah 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 and be lighter? Yes. Am I going to? Odds are no. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna do it
Yeah.
because I don't like it. So there.
What's your take on, drugs like Ozempic and other, other things that make there has always been such a moral equation of, that if you're fit, you are morally superior. And now we seem to be in an era where, maybe you can look good in a pair of jeans. You don't have to go husky, and it's not because you've really changed anything in your moral character.
Ah, the moral value of restraint. A lot of these drugs are, first of all, we can just look at them as weight loss drugs, because a lot of these drugs are proving to have a lot of effect in other areas,
Right.
and a lot of other areas of health. I am not a doctor. Do not play one on TV. I
Mhm.
read a lot, but I'm not about to get into the discussions of certain rare cases of diabetes or
Mhm.
any of these other things. I will say this: medicine should cure things, right? And then allow you to go on your way without it.
Mhm.
If you break your leg, you get a crutch. The crutch lets you walk until your leg heals. There's nothing wrong with a crutch. Do you want to walk on it for the rest of your life?
Mhm.
I personally wouldn't. I wouldn't want to be, I would strive to live my life to not be in a mobility scooter all my life because I don't like the
Right.
technology. Whatever it is, I think the goal is to get yourself to where you don't need it anymore. What I'm afraid of is that that is not going to be what happens with these drugs.
Mhm.
People realize I can eat the family bag of Cheetos and
Mhm.
still look like this, which is kind of a weird kind of bait and switch when you think about it. So
Mhm.
I hope, but I have no faith that that these drugs will be used with restraint to get people where they need to go, because there are a lot of folks that don't. I mean, look, I've asked myself, would I take it? I would love to look better. I know what I look like
Yeah.
when I'm out. I see myself. I'm realistic. No, no, because I earned this. I don't have a medical
Mm.
problem. I earned looking like this. You know
Yeah.
why? I put things in here.
Yeah.
Usually like martinis and things that, so no, I'm not going to do it. But I do think that for people that do use these, if it is really radically changing their health, and obviously for the better, they should do it. I would look to, 6 months down the line, is there a way to
Yeah.
not live your life with this? Is there a way to live sustainably? But I don't think that is what's going to happen. Be-
You've been outspoken in talking about how the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration are not particularly good, who are involved in these kinds of drugs as well as, various kinds of food pyramids or portions on
which have
plates.
almost
And
always been designed for industry.
yeah.
These
So, yeah.
organizations, the USDA was created to support industry,
Yeah.
not to protect consumers.
Yeah.
And we,
Yeah.
the great protector of our health. Look, organizations like the USDA should absolutely have hard and fast labeling rules, quality rules. You shouldn't be able to say one thing when it's another. I don't even think you should be able to take a container of corn oil and put the label gluten free on top of it.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, it is, but there's no gluten in corn,
Right.
so I think that we need better controls on what goes into food. I think we need warning labels. I think that a bag of Cheetos should be labeled like a pack of cigarettes, because in the end the level of damage is, I would say, close to the same, if
Yeah.
not worse. um, but the,
But
the thing that
these
we're
agencies don't work to change. I mean, I
No,
mean,
we need
would that ever
education. We
happen?
need
Yeah. Okay.
education. We
Mhm.
need I used to say that the culinary and nutritional education should be in the home. It's not
Mhm.
realistic anymore. I don't know any parents that can fight phones and iPads and social
Mhm.
media. No, we need to be like the Japanese. We need to have home ec in school from about age 6 to graduation. Absolutely, we need that. And
Discuss the Japanese experience then.
well, the
How does
Japanese
that work in
experience
a
is that they
way that
they have a home ec course that does everything from teach you how to balance a bank book
Mhm.
through nutritional training. And of course, they
Yeah.
put a lot of good nutrition on the table in their restaurants. Now, granted, we're talking about a country that has a
Mhm.
very homogenous cuisine, right?
Mhm.
Japanese cuisine. Now, there's a lot of different types of Japanese cuisine. But the point
Right.
is they put a lot of emphasis on the fact that if you teach someone about nutrition, a child about nutrition, and empower them, whether it's shelling the peas or draining the tofu, whatever it is, they
Mhm.
then go home and engage in their families in a more
Mhm.
team-like way, which is the probably the most important part of the model, is that it makes them better family members. Now, you're talking about
Mhm.
families that have, are preparing meals together the way that perhaps American families don't anymore. But by doing that and by getting the child engaged and empowering them with knowledge and skills, they eat better and they tend to be better family members, which eventually is going to
Mhm.
make a better societal member. If we don't get culinary and nutritional training into schools, I don't know what will happen,
Mhm.
because obesity, people don't want to admit what a problem obesity actually is,
Mhm.
because two industries thrive on it: the food industry and the medical industry
Mhm.
thrive on it. So I think we're being farmed, basically. We're
Hmm.
being farmed.
Are you what's your sense of the Make America Healthy Again movement that has really kind of emerged with the uh, appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to Health and Human Services? Is that something you applaud? Do you think it's BS, or what's your sense of it?
I have not read a piece of news since the election. I
Mhm.
don't know enough to talk about this. Uh, I needed to disengage from all of that. They're all going to do whatever it is that they're going to do. And we'll all live with it, I guess. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say whether I agree with it or not because I don't know. I don't know. I know one thing: school, education, or it
Yeah.
won't matter, or it won't
Yeah.
matter. Whatever it is that that individual is talking about doing will not matter without that.
I guess I want to end on 2 points. One, you talk about a family recipe Christmas Jello salad, which seems, I don't know if that would pass muster in a Japanese home ec class, but can you talk a little bit about why you love that and how that kind of exemplifies on a certain level the Southern culture, broadly speaking, that you come out?
We like our congealed salads.
Yeah.
We do. Jello-based salads are a big thing in the South. I love them and always have, and I always will. You mix up a couple of different Jellos and put a bunch of stuff in there, and
Mhm.
I'm hooked. My grandmother's, my mouth waters
Yeah.
thinking about it is lemon and orange Jello with pecans and chunks of pineapple and whole
Mhm.
cranberry sauce. There is something texturally very satisfying to me about that. I don't think it's the worst thing you can eat. It's fat free. Yeah, there's sugar in
Mhm.
it, you know. Um, and I think that for the Southern sensibility, there's a very very special place for that. But what's more important is the generational connectivity.
Mhm.
And the fact that when I talk about Jello mold stuff, people go,
Yeah.
"Oh,
Right.
it's interesting." So I'm gonna stick it.
Is that, I mean, is it partly because now we're sophisticated and Jello, is kind of a post-war product? I mean,
Yes,
it
yes,
pre-existed, but it's like,
yes,
oh, it's déclassé.
yes.
Anybody could eat
Very
Jello.
day class A. Anybody can.
Yeah.
Anybody.
Talk a bit about what is the power of coming from a broadly Southern background? You used to be a Southern Baptist, you're not quite anymore, but how does being from the South inform your worldview and something that other Americans as well as people from wherever can learn from?
Being being an aware Southern cook means understanding the incredible culinary heritage of the Southern experience. And I absolutely that is deeply entrenched not only in people escaping Europe, from Scotland to the Appalachians, but in very much embracing the full situation of the experience of enslaved peoples who very much have influenced what we call Southern cuisine.
Right.
And so to be a Southern cook, I think means constantly being aware of and reckoning with your place in that system,
Mhm.
for better, for worse, at least being aware of it and appreciating it and studying where these things come from and how they got there is a rich quilt work of peoples and experiences.
Yeah. And that intentionality or knowing where you're from and where you might be headed seems
Yeah.
to be central to everything you do.
I think it's got to be there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think you're robbing yourself of a whole dimension.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Alton Brown, thanks for talking to Reason. Good luck on your farewell tour
Thank you.
and the
Thank you very
book,
much.
Food for Thought. Thank you so much.
Fantastic, fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed
Yeah.
this. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Me too.